Okay, so I see a lot of content around how if you're a 9 to 5 employee, you can get into full-time entrepreneurship, but I don't see a lot of content around if you're a full-time entrepreneur and you're wanting to get back into corporate America, maybe as a full-time employee or a contractor, how you can leverage your entrepreneurial experience. And so I feel like this video is not to debate with you about whether or not, which path is right. Please don't debate with me in the comments. I just know personally that seasons change, right? And sometimes we have to realign our work to the seasons that we are in. As a career coach, I was actually working with Aundrea. She actually did a video testimonial for me that I'll link below, but she had her own interior design firm for 10 years. She was starting a family and wanted to get back into the corporate setting, and she didn't want to waste all of her experience. And so I was able to work with her over the course of like a couple of months to help her rework her resume and LinkedIn and learn how to speak to her experience and find the industry that she should segue in. And then she was able to find a project manager role in the construction space. And so I figured that it would be good. Again, I know this may be very niche, but I know that there are people that are looking to get back into corporate America, whether you're a content creator or entrepreneur. For those that are new here, I'm not going to go into a whole spiel, but I get it. Okay. I've been a project manager, building my own project manager career for the past 12 years. I've done it as a W-2 employee. I've done it as a W-2 contractor. I've opened my own consulting firm. I've also been doing career and business coaching on the side. And so I get it. I have worked my experience in every angle possible. And I completely understand, because me right now, I'm back as a full-time employee. And so I get it. Seasons change. And just because you had to change with the season does not mean that you are a quitter or a failure. So let me give you the tools that you need to be able to segue from entrepreneurship or content creation back into being a full-time employee. Okay, so tip number one is I want you to focus on the industry that you already have experience in and or is adjacent to the industry that you already have experience in. So transitioning from being a full-time entrepreneur and getting a corporate America role, especially as a 9 to 5 employee, maybe when you've done entrepreneurship for the past 5 to 10 years, is already going to be a challenge within itself with you being able to translate your experience into the corporate setting. Don't make it harder on yourself by then trying to transition into an industry where your experience doesn't even translate in. And so with my client Aundrea, I'm not going to tell her if she's had an interior design firm for the past 10 years to go and get into healthcare, right? How can we leverage the experience that you already have so that you're not starting from scratch? And so with her, I started to dig deeper on like, okay, well, what types of clients did you work with? What types of vendors and stakeholders did you work with? And she worked a lot with like construction folks, people who did like electrician and plumbing and, all of that. I'm not in construction, but you know what I mean. So it made sense for her to either segue into like another interior design firm, or maybe even a construction space, or like a retail that services, interior design clients. And so that's how we were kind of able to segue her into like construction project management. But I use that as an example to say like, focus on the industries that are adjacent to where you already have experience in so that you're not starting from scratch. Number two is you're going to want to focus your resume and your LinkedIn to highlight your transferable skills, one, and two, your impact-driven results. And so when it comes to your resume, I would say when it comes to your titles, like I see a lot of people that maybe were an entrepreneur say like founder of whatever the name of your business was, but that doesn't tell a recruiter that maybe is not in the entrepreneurial space, like what that means, right? So I always say first, your resume obviously needs to be tailored to the roles that you are seeking. So for example, if you're trying to get into project management, founder of XYZ business firm, it tells me nothing, right? But if you can say that you were the lead enterprise project manager, that's not being deceptive of your role, because what you're highlighting within your resume is your project management experience, right? So you want to make sure that you're tweaking your titles within reason, right, to the scope of the work that you actually did. Again, that is relevant to the roles that you're applying for. So in her example, I had her tweak most of her experience to how she was leading her interior design projects as a founder, right? And so she was doing a lot of like cross-functional coordination with different types of stakeholders and vendors. She was the liaison between her clients and other contractors, right? And so because that's what we're highlighting, she managed her project budget, she managed her client project schedule and communications. And so because that's what we're highlighting within her resume, that's what I'm going to make sure her title reflects. So you want to think about like what are the titles that are transferable, and then what are the skill sets that you've already done, again, that are transferable to the roles that you are seeking. The other really big opportunity for entrepreneurs looking to get back into corporate America is showing your impact driven results, right? And so instead of just saying, like in her example, like I manage client projects, I would say like I maintained a 98% on time delivery rate for client projects ranging from 100K to $2.8 million, right? So that really speaks to the scope of the types of projects that that client was working on, right? And so if you were maybe a content creator and you were able, maybe partnering with the brand, and you were able to increase their brand visibility by 20%, maybe they went from, 20 sales to 200 sales by you promoting that product, right? Those are the things that you want to highlight within your work experience, how you were able to grow a business, how you were able to increase visibility, the types of stakeholders that you worked with, and as a result of your work, this is how it benefited your intern client, your own business. And so you want to make sure that all of your experience within your resume is quantified and is impact driven. I think the other opportunity to highlight on your resume and LinkedIn, and I have other videos that kind of highlight what to put on your resume and LinkedIn. Let me know if you want me to do an updated one, because when you are being an entrepreneur going back into corporate America, your LinkedIn arguably is even more important than your resume. That's my stance in general. But your LinkedIn is pretty much like your online searchable portfolio, but it's also an opportunity for you to share your market expertise, right? And so I would always tell you, like, look for opportunities or businesses, companies that are more innovative, and you want to be seen as a thought leader, a subject matter expert, and be like, for example, sharing on LinkedIn how you understand based off of being in the entrepreneurial space, like where your specific market is going, and sharing that insight that again would be beneficial to maybe a company that needs to go through some type of technical transformation or digital transformation, or maybe they're trying to implement AI and you as an entrepreneur have been implementing AI within your business. So that's something that you could bring to a company that is innovative. That's not what maybe people who have been there for the past 20, 30 years have been doing. And so look for opportunities where you can show like innovation, display your knowledge of the innovation that's happening within your current market, and be able to display like how you're keeping a pulse, how you're, innovative, and, you would be coming to bring specifically a different edge to that company. I hope that that makes sense. But yeah, you want to show your impact driven results. You want to be able to translate your skill sets and your titles to reflect the roles that you're seeking. And then you want to make sure that you are showing how you have done like impact driven results. Okay, so the next tip that I would say for those trying to get back into corporate America, maybe if you've had like a non-traditional career path, is leveraging your local networking, especially your local startup networks. I would always recommend, if you do have like a more of a non-traditional career path, to look at maybe smaller companies, mid-sized companies, startups that maybe are a little bit more understanding, if you will, because they are doing something new and innovative to your non-traditional career path, maybe versus like your big Fortune 500 companies, which not saying that it wouldn't work for those larger companies, but sometimes like if they are like more traditional, it can be hard to kind of translate your experience, versus if you're working with a startup within the industry that you already have experience in, they're going to appreciate whatever industry experience you can bring, right? Even if it was non-traditional, especially again, if you're able to show those impact driven results, right? So I would really leverage your local networking opportunities, because I wouldn't waste your time, to me at least, waste your time like searching on job boards and your resume is in the pile of thousands of people, right? I want you to be in networking events every single week where you're able to speak face to face with someone and be able to speak to your experience, right? And pitch yourself just as you would do if you're like pitching clients, right? Take that same approach. And so you want to think about like, again, the industry relevant networking opportunities or events or organizations. Think about like, do the research to figure out what are those startups maybe within your city or region that would benefit from your experience. And you want to make that target company list and do that targeted one-on-one outreach if you can. So I would really leverage, again, LinkedIn outreach, in-person networking, and then create like a target company list of smaller startups, mid-sized companies where, again, your non-traditional career path is not frowned upon, if that makes sense. Okay, so the next tip that I would say is once you've kind of redone your resume, your LinkedIn, you're finding your networking opportunities, starting to do that one-on-one outreach, is you want to make sure that you can speak to your experience in an interview. Because what I find with my clients in general, but especially with entrepreneurs, is sometimes they are so big picture that it's hard for them to communicate what they were doing in the day-to-day in a way that resonates with the hiring manager or recruiter. And that's not saying that you have to change your personality or tone to sound more corporate, but you do need to be able to use, I guess, data-driven results and be able to speak the language so that it resonates, right? So in that example, I did an mock interview with my client, and I wanted her to be able to speak to, if she's trying to get into project management, you need to be able to speak to how you juggle multiple projects. You need to be able to speak to how you dealt with competing priorities. You need to be able to speak to like how you dealt with like angry clients, or how you did work with, client communications, how you were able to work across different stakeholder groups, contractors and clients and vendors and all of that stuff, right? And so what I would find sometimes when it comes to like, tell me about a time when you dealt with a difficult client, we start to get into like this long drawn out story. And it's like you get so caught up in a story that you don't really get to the point. And so I really like using the STAR method when it comes to interviewing questions. And I would use ChatGPT or Claude and say, okay, this is my experience. This is the role that I'm trying to get into within the industry and companies that I'm thinking about, and list those out. Give me maybe 10 questions that are, would normally be asked for these types of roles. And you want to practice and have a specific answer for those types of questions using the STAR method. So in that specific interview question where I practiced with her, like, tell me about a time where you dealt with a difficult client or you couldn't meet a deadline. Well, in that situation, when I was working with multiple client projects simultaneously while also trying to juggle different vendors and contractors, there would be times where maybe timelines were delayed beyond my control. And so there was a specific example where I was working on a client project. We were doing a major home renovation, and the plumbing company that we were contracting with, had a emergency situation to where they would not be able to meet their requirements within the project, within that specified timeline. And so therefore the project was going to be significantly delayed by several weeks. I worked with the client and tried to express to her and was transparent with her around the delays. And I was able to come up with a mitigation plan to say like, okay, within this 2-week span while we're waiting on plumbing, these are the other activities that we can do to try to keep the project on track. I maintained constant communication with her and gave her updates. And then as a result, she really appreciated the transparency, and we were still able to get the project done on time. So that's a very like simple example, but what you're trying to communicate within that question is how you are transparent with communication, how you keep your clients and or stakeholders abreast, how you have a mitigation plan in place to factor in any potential risk. And that's really the point, right? You don't want to get into this whole spiel about all different difficult clients that you had over time. Like, you want to be able to show what you specifically did to mitigate different clients. And again, you want to be able to have different examples to speak to that. And so again, it's not about sounding more corporate. It's about showing how you were able to get the same results that they are looking for in corporate. Hope that makes sense. And so depending on your role, you want to be able to have those like 5 to 10 examples. Again, depending on the most frequently asked questions, you want to have those examples ready to pull from that you can easily speak to using the STAR method to kind of help keep you on track. And again, focus on what you did and focus on data-driven, impact-driven results, right? You also want to be ready to tell your career story, because as an entrepreneur, it's always going to come up like, well, what's making you want to get back into corporate America? Or what made you want to get into entrepreneurship? And so you want to be able to upfront tell that story. And I always say, leverage that first question where they say like, tell me about yourself, like that answer to that question. And maybe I can do let me know in the comments below if you want me to do a dedicated like interview prep video. But you want to be able to, when they ask you like, tell me about yourself, or like what's making you want to transition, you want to be able to tell your career story that shows your upward progression, maybe your transition into entrepreneurship, and then what's making you want to pivot back into corporate America that again doesn't doesn't sound the alarms, if you will, but then still makes it relevant to the role. So in my client's example, she had been working in the interior design space as a corporate manager, for example, for 8 years, and then she was laid off, unfortunately, and her client still wanted to work with her. And so she started her own interior design firm. Over the course of her firm, she was able to see, over $10 million in revenue. These are the types of people that she was able to work with, the types of projects that she was able to work with, and then personally, and then we start to transition. Personally, I got married, I started having young children, and I really wanted to be able to still have that impact on clients, but be able to do it within a corporate setting so that I can have, more stability within my day-to-day work. And so that's kind of why I'm wanting to transition that's why I chose to close my business rather and look for an opportunity where I can still have that same type of impact, but within, a company or a corporate setting. So that's just an example of how you can kind of tell your upward progression of, I started out as a coordinator, then I became a manager, then I became, a senior manager. Then after that, I was laid off, or maybe I saw an opportunity to start doing this on my own. I started doing this. This was the impact of that. This is the wins that I had within my business. I'm now seeking stability due to like personal changes or whatever that reason is. And now, that is why I'm still wanting to be impactful and still bring that innovation and entrepreneurial spirit to your company. And I think within this opportunity that you're interviewing me for, I'm really able to demonstrate XYZ. And that's what makes me interested in the role. As an example, that was a little rocky, but you want to be able to, again, show your upward progression and show how it's relevant to the role and be ready to answer why you want to segue back into corporate. The last thing that I'll say for entrepreneurs looking to get back into corporate America, that is really broad and relevant for everyone, but especially for entrepreneurs, because you're used to like having your set price and you're used to like putting your proposals based off of your pricing list. You don't want to lead with that same strategy when it comes to salary negotiation for a corporate role. So what I typically tell my clients to do is, let's say you're in the initial interview with the recruiter and they're doing a screening interview and they say, okay, well, what's your salary range, or what are your salary expectations for this role? You don't want to give them a number, right? Because sometimes with entrepreneurs, when you're doing that discovery call, for example, you tell them what the pricing range is going to be. You don't want to price yourself too high or below what the actual budget for that role is. And so how I would ask that question back to the recruiter, if they were to ask me what are my salary expectations, I would say, well, it depends on the scope of the role. And I was actually curious to ask you what the budget is for the role. And then when they give you the budget, then you can say like, yes, those are those are in line with my expectations. You obviously want to do your research to know what the salary ranges are, but you want them to tell you so that you don't price yourself out of an opportunity. And so that's kind of, my initial like 3 to 5 tips that I would say. Let me know if you want me to do a part 2, because I also have recommendations for people that are, that have been full-time entrepreneurs. Sometimes I don't recommend for them to get into a W-2 employee role. There are ways that you can do contracting. There are ways that you can do freelancing to where you can still get maybe the benefits of working like for an agency, for an example, and still get health insurance and 401k and, still function as an employee, but it still gives you some of the flexibility that maybe you had as an entrepreneur. So let me know in the comments below if you would appreciate a part 2 and any other questions you may have. I'm getting back into my content flow, so I'm trying to make these videos very simple but educational and helpful to y'all. So yes, thank y'all for watching this video. I also do, let me plug here, I also do one-on-one coaching. So if you are interested in like coming up with your own personal like career strategy plan, doing mock interviews, reviewing your resume, LinkedIn, I will link the my office hours call link in the description below. But anyway, hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'll see y'all on the next one. Bye.